The storm did not begin outside, though thunder rolled across the valley later that night. It began in the polished marble bathroom of Stone Manor, where pride and misunderstanding collided with the weight of generations. Richard Stone's voice tore through the air like a blade.
"Get your filthy hands off my father."
"Maya." His tone was not merely sharp. It was filled with the fury of a man who had spent his life controlling empires and now felt that control slipping through his fingers. His reflection in the mirror stared back at him with a rigid jaw and eyes that barely concealed disgust. Every vein in his neck stood out, straining against his skin as though his body itself was bracing for war. On the floor, frail and trembling, was Charles Stone. 78 years old, a man who had once commanded boardrooms and towered over adversaries, was now on his knees, hunched beside the toilet, holding a scrub brush as if it were some sacred relic. The brush shook in his hand, not from weakness alone but from determination. His face, pale with age, held no shame, only a strange, almost peaceful resolve. He had chosen to do this. And beside him stood Maya, the maid who had quietly kept this house in order for years. Her rubber gloves were still damp, her hands trembling as she reached toward the sink, but her expression carried something both fragile and strong at once. "Mr. Stone," Maya whispered, her voice soft, almost apologetic. "He asked me to. I didn't make him do this." Richard's eyes blazed. He would not believe what he was seeing. His father, the titan of industry, crouched on cold tiles like a penitent prisoner. And beside him, the housemaid, his own employee, standing as if complicit in some humiliation. "You're 78, Dad," Richard spat. "And she's what? Your keeper now? Making you clean toilets like a servant?" His words ricocheted around the walls, dripping with disbelief. He turned his rage on Maya. "You think you can come in here and humiliate my father? You think because he's old he won't stop you?" Maya shook her head quickly, her brown eyes wide with fear. "No, sir, please, he wanted this." He said it mattered. Before she could say more, another presence entered, the sound of heels clicking like a metronome of disdain. Clara, Richard's wife, appeared in the doorway, her posture elegant, her face carved into disdainful lines. She took in the scene with a single sweeping glance, then let out a laugh that was not really laughter, but the sound of poison being poured into a glass. "I told you, Richard," she said smoothly. "This is what happens when you let help get too close. Boundaries blur, roles reverse. And now look, your father kneeling like a beggar while the maid stands over him." Her words were gasoline, and Richard was already on fire. He turned on Maya again, his voice like ice. "What kind of sick power play is this? What are you running here?" Maya's lips parted, her voice trembling but earnest. He wanted to feel useful. He said he needed to atone for something. Crack. Richard's hand struck before thought could intervene. The sound echoed against marble, sharp and ugly. The back of his palm connected with Maya's cheek, sending her stumbling into the counter. A thin line of blood traced her temple where she had hit the edge. The silence afterward was suffocating. Charles shouted in horror, his voice breaking, "Richard, stop this madness!" But his son barely heard. Rage roared louder than reason. Maya pressed a trembling hand to her wound, her eyes brimming with disbelief and pain. "You don't understand," she whispered. Richard, breathing hard, pointed to the door. "Get out. Pack your things. I won't have you in this house another second." Her breath hitched. For a moment it seemed she would plead, but instead, Maya simply nodded, lips pressed together. She walked slowly toward the doorway, dignity clinging to her even in dismissal. At the threshold she turned back. Her voice was barely audible, yet carried more strength than any scream. "He asked me to help him remember who he was before the money. That's all." And then she was gone. Richard stood frozen, his pulse pounding, the bathroom shrinking around him. The smell of bleach was suddenly unbearable. His gaze dropped to the wet marks on the floor where his father's knees had pressed into the tile. Clara exhaled dramatically behind him, as though this scene were nothing more than tiresome proof of her earlier warnings. "You need to dismiss her properly," Clara said coldly. "People like that always come back if you leave the door cracked." But Richard did not answer. His father's weary voice cut through the silence instead. "She was helping me, son," Charles whispered. "Helping?" Richard barked bitterly. "This isn't help. This is humiliation." Charles met his gaze, his expression heavy with sorrow. "Maybe humiliation is what I needed." Richard could not comprehend it. His eyes drifted to the sink where an envelope sat. addressed in Maya's handwriting for Mr. Stone. Inside, he would later discover, was a flash drive and a single line written in her careful script. You only saw what you wanted. The storm outside had only just begun, but within the walls of Stone Manor it was already raging. The rain began not long after Maya closed the heavy oak door of the manor behind her. Thin needles of drizzle fell from the sky, pattering softly against the gravel drive as she carried her worn suitcase down the path. Each step felt heavier than the weight of clothes inside the bag. She was dragging the memory of what had just unfolded, the sting on her cheek burning hotter than the blood that still marked her temple. She did not cry. Tears, she had long ago learned, were a luxury of those whose dignity could afford to break. Instead, she kept her back straight, her hands steady, even as her insides quivered with the aftershocks of Richard's fury. For 5 years, she had walked these corridors with quiet discipline, folding linens, polishing banisters, cooking meals no one thanked her for. She had survived Clara's glances, Richard's indifference, and the silent judgment of guests who never remembered her name. Through it all, she had remained steady and visible. Until tonight. The guest house at the edge of the estate was small, a lonely cottage meant for staff who belonged neither fully in nor out of the Stone family's gilded orbit. Inside, Maya set her suitcase down and sat heavily on the narrow twin bed. The air smelled of peppermint tea from the mug she had brewed earlier that morning, but now the taste in her mouth was bitter, as though every comfort had turned to ash. Her shoulder throbbed from where she had struck the counter. She touched the bruise gingerly, not because of the pain. It would fade, but because it felt like proof of what pride could do when unchecked. On the dresser stood a small photo tucked into the frame of the mirror. It was the only thing she owned that could still soften her heart. A picture of her mother before the fire, before life scattered Maya into the homes of strangers. In it, she was 17, smiling in a yellow sundress, her mother's arms wrapped around her. Maya whispered to the memory now. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cross a line. But still, her words faltered. There was no comfort here, not even from ghosts. She opened the drawer and drew out her leather journal, the only luxury she had ever bought for herself since moving into Stone Manor. On a fresh page, she scrawled the day's date with trembling fingers. June 10th fired again, not for what I did, but for what they chose to see. She paused, then set the pen down. Words were not enough. Not tonight. A knock startled her. She hesitated, fearing Clara had come to twist the knife or Richard to deliver another blow. Not physical this time, but the cold cruelty of dismissal. When she opened the door, however, it was Rosa, the cook. Her apron was still dusted with flour, her eyes full of quiet sorrow. They say you're leaving tonight, Rosa said softly. Maya nodded. She could not trust her voice not to break. Without another word, Rosa pressed a foil-wrapped parcel into her hands. Pan de maíz. Still warm. You can't take this storm on an empty stomach. Maya's throat tightened. Thank you, she whispered. Rosa's eyes glistened. I don't believe what they said about you. And Mr. Charles, he'll miss you more than anyone. Maya looked down. He was the only one who really saw me. Rosa hugged her quickly, fiercely, then slipped back into the night, leaving the door ajar and the scent of wet pine drifting inside. Maya set the cornbread aside, untouched. Her appetite had vanished, stolen by shame that was not hers to carry. She sat again, staring at the bruise spreading across her temple, thinking of Charles, the old man's fragile dignity, his whispered plea earlier that day. She remembered the moment vividly, entering the master parlor at dawn to find him already dressed, sitting like a man waiting for judgment. His cane leaned beside him, his eyes sharp but heavy. You have a moment, Maya? He had asked. Of course, sir, she had replied. I need your help, he said, tapping his cane against the floor. I need to clean the guest bathroom myself. At first she thought he was joking, but Charles's gaze had been serious, weighted with something she could not name. I hurt someone I should have protected long ago, he confessed, his voice low. Every night it comes back to me. I thought if I did something humbling, something that bent me down, it might help. Maya had sat beside him, torn between pity and respect. You don't owe anyone that, she said softly. He looked at his own hands, then gripped hers. Will you let me? Will you stand by me while I do this one thing? And she had. Not to command him, not to shame him, but to shield his dignity. Now, hours later, that memory was all she had. She closed her journal, zipped her suitcase, and braced herself for the unknown beyond the manor gates. But elsewhere in the house, Richard sat alone in his study, the envelope Maya had left heavy in his hands. His fury had cooled into something darker, unease. He tore it open and slid the flash drive into his laptop. The footage flickered onto the screen, grainy black and white images from the hallway camera. Charles appeared first, frail but determined, carrying a bucket. Maya followed, protesting, trying to take it from him. Charles waved her away, lips moving in what looked like a faint smile. She hesitated, then reluctantly handed him gloves and cleaning supplies. He knelt on his own, demanded the brush, and she stood back, watching like a guardian, not a master. The video ended there. No coercion, no humiliation, only choice. Richard leaned back, running a hand through his hair as the storm rattled the windows. In the dim reflection of the monitor, his face looked foreign to him, twisted with guilt. He had inherited his father's temper, and tonight he had worn it like armor. Now, in the silence of the study, that armor felt like chains. Across the hall, Charles coughed softly in his sleep. Maya walked alone down the road, suitcase in hand, the drizzle soaking her coat. And between them all lay a truth, simple, unvarnished, that Richard could no longer deny. He had only seen what he wanted. The manor looked the same when Maya returned, but she did not. The Blacktown car rolled to a slow stop at the gravel driveway. The same path she had walked down in shame only days earlier. She stepped out with her leather bag clutched tightly, the drizzle replaced by sunlight that seemed almost mocking. The cypress trees flanking the entrance stood tall as ever. The bronze statue of a horse gleamed with polished pride, and the manicured lawns stretched wide like the stage of an opera. Nothing had changed outside, but within her chest everything was altered. Richard waited on the porch, not in his usual armor of a suit and tie, but in a plain white shirt, sleeves rolled up. He looked smaller without his trappings of power, more exposed, though his stance was rigid with nervous resolve. "Thank you for coming," he said when she stopped 3 feet away. "I haven't decided to stay," Maya replied flatly. "I know," he said, "but I hope you will." Her eyes flicked to the guest house. "That's where I'd be again?" "No," Richard said quickly. "I've moved you to the East Wing. It's private. You deserve more than what you had before." Maya studied him for a long moment. "Privacy doesn't erase what happened." His voice softened. "No, only time and action might." Inside, unseen by them, Clara watched from the upstairs parlor, her hand wrapped around a crystal glass. Behind the curtain, her face was a mask of fury disguised as composure. To her, Maya's return was not a chance for redemption. It was a threat. The house was her kingdom, and Richard had just welcomed a trespasser back inside. By late afternoon, Maya settled into her new quarters in the East Wing. A sunlit suite overlooking the rose garden, furnished neatly with fresh towels and small gestures of respect she had never been shown before. Yet the silence was heavy. The past clung to the walls, whispering reminders that no arrangement of furniture could bury. That evening, Richard came to her door. He did not step too close, but his presence filled the threshold. "I wanted to check if everything's to your liking," he said. "It is," she answered without meeting his eyes. He lingered, then confessed. "I spoke with my father this morning. He wasn't upset with you when you left. He was upset with me." Finally, Maya looked up. Her voice was calm but steady, each word sharp as glass. "You hurt me, Mr. Stone. You assumed things about me because of what I look like, where I stand in your house, the way I carry myself. And then you laid your hand on me in anger." Richard's gaze dropped. "I can't erase that," he admitted, "but I will never excuse it. I will spend every day trying to be better than the man I was in that moment." Maya gave a single nod. That was all she could offer him. Acknowledgement, not forgiveness. Not yet. Later, when Richard left, she unfolded a small piece of paper he had placed on her nightstand. It was a note written in Charles's crooked handwriting. "Maya, we don't get many chances in this life to be forgiven while still breathing. You gave me that. No matter what anyone else sees, I will always remember what you did for me. Charles." She pressed the paper to her chest, feeling both the weight and the warmth of the words. Meanwhile, in the formal dining room, Clara sat at the table across from Richard and Charles. The silence was brittle. Clara dabbed her lips delicately with a napkin, then spoke with venom disguised as civility. So the help returns and suddenly no one has an appetite. Charles put down his fork. She did nothing wrong, he said firmly. The only disgrace in this house was how we treated her. Clara's smile was tight, cold. You always did fall for sweet voices and downcast eyes. Charles's eyes hardened. I fall for character. You might try it sometime. Her chair scraped loudly as she stood, her voice sharp with finality. Let me know when this house returns to normal. She swept from the room, her perfume lingering like poison in the air. That night the house grew still. But the stillness was not peace, it was tension coiled, waiting. Maya sat by her window, staring at the stars. She hadn't unpacked her belongings fully, because part of her refused to believe this stay was permanent. Yet something in the house felt changed. The silence no longer belonged to Clara's cruelty or Richard's pride. It was thicker, stranger, as though the walls themselves carried secrets. And then one evening, those secrets revealed themselves. Maya had wandered into the old study, a room long abandoned, dust clinging to the air like cobwebs of memory. She noticed something odd. The rug beneath the tall windows was slightly shifted. Kneeling, she peeled it back and found a loose floorboard. Beneath it was a cloth-bound ledger, its pages yellowed with time and tucked inside a photograph. The image made her breath catch. A young Charles Stone, smiling, his arm slung casually around another man. A black man, his grin radiant, his presence warm. On the back of the photo was a name written in Charles's hand, 1974. Me and Jonah, the only man I ever owed more than I could repay. Maya clutched the photograph, a storm of questions rising within her. Who was Jonah? Why had his name never been spoken in this house? And what debt could weigh so heavily on a man who had built towers of power? For the first time, Maya understood. This story was not just hers, not just Richard's or Clara's. The shadows in this house stretched back decades, and the reckoning had only just begun. The photograph haunted Maya. She carried it with her as though its edges might crumble if left unattended, its weight far greater than paper. Charles Stone's smiling youth beside the man named Jonah was more than memory. It was a key to the silence that had strangled this family for decades. The next morning, she approached Charles carefully. He sat by the window, wrapped in a shawl, his face drawn with age but alert. "Mr. Stone," she said softly, "may I speak with you privately?" When the nurse left them alone, she drew the photo from her pocket and placed it in his lap. "I found this in the old study, under the floorboards. You and Jonah, 1974. For a moment, Charles's face was stone, unreadable. Then the years cracked open and sorrow spilled across his features. He closed his eyes, breathing the name like a prayer. Jonah Davis. Who was he? Maya asked gently. Charles's voice trembled. He was better than family. He was my brother in everything but blood. We met at Stanford. He studied law. He believed in justice, in fighting for those no one else would stand for. He was smarter than I was, braver, and He faltered, his hands tightening. I failed him. Maya listened as the story poured out, jagged and halting. Jonah had been arrested in 1974, accused of loitering and attempted burglary outside a convenience store. No weapon, no evidence, only the suspicion of a nervous white shop owner and the color of Jonah's skin. Charles had begged his father, Elliot Stone, to intervene. The old man had power, influence, money enough to shift the tide of any courtroom, but Elliot had refused. That boy is not your kind. Let him go. Instead, Elliot paid for the station's new roof the following morning, buying silence with a stroke of his pen. Jonah served 5 years. By the time he emerged, the world had changed, but their friendship had not survived. I buried him in silence, Charles whispered. And silence rotted everything. Maya's throat tightened. Then let's bring his name back. Charles's eyes glistened. That's why I asked you to help me clean that bathroom. Not to humiliate myself, but to bend finally for something real. Jonah carried humility his whole life. I carried pride. I wanted for once to live like he did. The conversation left Maya shaken but resolute. That night, she shared what she had learned with Richard. For the first time, he listened, not as a master, not as a son defending legacy, but as a man cornered by truth. Jonah Davis was no longer just a name. He was the ghost of Stone Manor, and he demanded to be heard. The investigation began quietly. Richard contacted legal aid, reaching out to Tasha Linwood, a sharp civil rights lawyer with eyes like steel. She explained the challenge. Records from that era were often lost, especially when influential families were involved. But there was one lead. The arresting officer, Sheriff Milton Gray, was still alive, retired in Santa Rosa. "I'll go," Maya said. Richard frowned. "No, if he sees me, he'll see money and influence. He'll shut down before he speaks." "Let me—" "No," Maya interrupted firmly. "He'll see Jonah in me. He'll remember. And maybe guilt will do what justice never did." So it was decided. Days later, Maya stood before a modest cottage in Santa Rosa, her heart hammering as wind chimes tinkled above the porch. Richard waited in the car, watching anxiously. The door opened to reveal an old man, frail but sharp-eyed, his walls lined with faded flags and hunting trophies. "Sheriff Gray, my name is Maya William," she said steadily. "I work for the Stone family. I came to ask about Jonah Davis." The old man stiffened. "I've got nothing to say about that boy." But Maya stepped forward. "Then maybe you'll listen." The conversation was tense. Gray defended himself at first, claiming it had been standard procedure in those days. A white store owner had called, said Jonah looked suspicious. That was all it took. But Maya pressed, her voice cutting through the stale air. He wasn't resisting. He wasn't stealing. The back door had a broken latch anyone could jiggle. You didn't arrest him for a crime. You arrested him for his skin. Gray's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly his defenses cracked. That boy, he was smart, quiet, not the type to cause trouble. But I was told to bury his case. Told to silence Charles Stone's statement. Told to make it disappear. By whom? Maya asked, though she already knew. Gray's eyes darkened. Elliot Stone. He came down to the station himself. Called Jonah a stain waiting to spread. Gave me a check the next morning. I cashed it. And I've lived with that filth on my hands ever since. From a cabinet, Gray produced a narrow box. Inside was an envelope he had kept for decades. I don't know why I saved this. Maybe guilt. It's Jonah's original statement. Typed, signed. Never filed. Maya held the document reverently. It was Jonah's own voice, silenced for half a century. "I need you to sign an affidavit," she said softly. "Admit this is authentic. Admit what you did." Gray hesitated, his liver-spotted hands trembling. "You're asking me to admit to burying evidence." "I'm asking you," Maya replied, "to finally tell the truth." And to her surprise, he nodded. "Get me the paper." Back at the manor, while Maya fought for truth, Clara plotted in silence. In her private study, she reviewed a folder delivered by her lawyer, Gregory Calhoun. Inside lay Maya's past like a loaded weapon. Foster homes. Dropped out schooling. Even an arrest record at 19. Charges later dropped. But damning in Clara's hands. She smiled coldly, tucking the file away. To her, justice wasn't rising. It was a chess game. And Clara intended to move first. The morning of the hearing dawned gray and solemn, as though even the sky understood the weight of what was to come. Rain slicked the steps of the California State Capitol, where reporters gathered like restless birds. Cameras were poised, notebooks open, questions sharpened. Yet inside the chamber, a deeper silence hummed, the silence that comes before history bends. Maya sat in the second row, her navy dress plain but dignified. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, knuckles pale, though her eyes burned with purpose. Beside her sat Charles, frail in his wheelchair but upright, refusing the blanket the nurse had offered. "Let them see what time has done," he had said that morning. "Better that than what silence did." Richard sat in the front, his face a mask of determination, though his restless hands betrayed him. The gavel fell. "This hearing is now in session. We are here to review the wrongful arrest and incarceration of Mr. Jonah Davis in 1974, and to consider posthumous exoneration." Richard rose when called. At the podium, he seemed smaller than the tycoon whose name echoed across corporations. His voice was quiet at first, but grew with each word. "My name is Richard Stone. Jonah Davis was my father's closest friend at Stanford. He was brilliant, principled, and his life was stolen by injustice. My family did nothing to stop it. Worse, we buried the truth. Today we bring evidence not for pity, but for restoration." He gestured toward Maya. "We submit the affidavit of Sheriff Milton Gray, who admits to burying evidence under orders from my grandfather. We present Jonah's original testimony, Discovered after decades, we submit a recording from Jonah himself, made before his arrest, and a statement from my father, Charles Stone, who sits here today. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Reporters scribbled furiously. Richard's voice broke, but he did not falter. Silence is not neutrality. It is complicity, and my family was complicit. We are here to end that silence. Then came Jonah's voice. The old cassette had been restored, digitized, and now it filled the chamber with its haunting calm. My name is Jonah Davis. If you are hearing this, it means I was right not to trust the system. I never broke a law. I never stole. I was breathing in the wrong place with the wrong skin. But I do not ask for vengeance. I ask for truth. Say my name not with shame but with strength. The room fell silent, but it was not emptiness. It was reverence. People wept quietly. The air, thick with the weight of a voice, finally released. Charles motioned for Maya to wheel him forward. At the microphone, his voice was raspy but clear. I am 78 years old. I have seen presidents rise and wars waged. But my greatest failure was not speaking for Jonah when he was dragged away in chains. I let fear keep me silent, and silence is the most cowardly betrayal. Today I call him what he always was, my brother. Give him back his name. The committee deliberated briefly. The decision was unanimous. The California Senate Committee on Historical Justice hereby recognizes Jonah Davis as a victim of wrongful arrest and systemic discrimination. We grant him formal exoneration and entry into the Civil Rights Archive. Applause thundered through the chamber. Maya felt her chest tighten, tears finally breaking free. Beside her, Charles bowed his head, whispering something only she could hear. Thank you, Jonah, forgive me. Outside, cameras swarmed, microphones thrust forward, but Maya remained by Charles's side, her expression composed. When Richard approached her, his voice was low, almost reverent. We did it. No, she corrected gently. Jonah did. We just carried his torch. The weeks that followed transformed the manor. The California Civil Rights Archive announced a new exhibit dedicated to Jonah Davis. Universities requested materials. A mural of Jonah was approved for the old district courthouse. History once buried was now blossoming. But within Stone Manor, another kind of reckoning brewed. Clara retreated into her wing, curtains drawn, wine glasses half drained. The folder of Maya's past sat useless on her desk. Richard had dismissed it with a single sentence. I have seen who she really is, and it is more than anything on paper. The house that once served Clara's silence now vibrated with truth, and she could not live with it. Charles, meanwhile, faded quietly, but with peace he had not known in years. One afternoon, Maya wheeled him to Jonah's modest grave in Oakland. The original plaque was plain, nearly forgotten. Charles produced a new one, small but heavy, engraved with words he had chosen. Truth never dies. Jonah Davis, friend, fighter, free. Together they pressed it into the earth. For a long time they sat side by side, old man and young woman, guardians of a name reborn. When Maya stood at the podium weeks later at a statewide justice conference, she did not shake. Her voice carried steady and sure across the auditorium filled with students, lawmakers, and scholars. My name is Maya William. I was born into no legacy, raised in borrowed homes, told history belonged to others. But then I found the voice of a man who refused to be silenced even in death. Jonah Davis. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers for decades, waiting in drawers, in lost files, in unmarked graves. But it never disappears. And when we choose to listen, truly listen, we realize it was never about rewriting history. It was about finishing the sentence. Applause rose like a wave. Rolling across the hall, back at the manor, Charles listened to the live stream on a tablet Rosa had set up. His eyes filled with tears. Good girl, he murmured and closed his eyes with a faint smile. For the first time in decades, he rested easily. That night, when Maya returned, she paused before the staircase where a new portrait had been hung. Jonah Davis, framed, honored, finally unshackled from silence. She traced his face with her eyes, the strong jaw, the determined gaze. He was no longer a ghost in the floorboards. He was a name, a legacy, a movement. Stone Manor no longer belonged to silence. It belonged to truth. And truth at last had a home.